I never thought being called the family disappointment would lead to my name in Forbes magazine. But there I was at 28, watching my parents, who once refused to help with my college tuition while buying my sister a luxury condo, suddenly claiming credit for my success. The same success they had called an unrealistic pipe dream just 3 years earlier. Funny how quickly perspectives change when your daughter's startup sells for 8 figures. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first time I heard my father call me worthless, I was 16. I had just shown him my report card, straight A's except for a B+ in advanced calculus, and was expecting at least a nod of approval. Instead, he slid the paper back across the kitchen counter with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Rebecca got straight A's in every subject," he said, referring to my older sister. "And she was taking college courses by your age." That moment crystallized a pattern I'd felt but couldn't articulate for years. In the Harrington household, there were 2 categories, Rebecca and everyone else. Rebecca, 4 years my senior, was the golden child, brilliant, beautiful, and blessed with our parents' unconditional support and admiration. I was. Well, the other daughter? Our family's sprawling colonial house in Connecticut's affluent Greenwich neighborhood was filled with evidence of Rebecca's excellence. The mahogany-paneled study displayed her debate trophies, academic medals, and acceptance letters from prestigious universities. My achievements: captain of the field hockey team, editor of the school newspaper, straight A student, minus that one B+, were acknowledged with perfunctory congratulations before conversations inevitably pivoted back to Rebecca's latest accomplishment. By 18, I had developed an efficient internal system for processing the constant comparisons. I became adept at anticipating the moment my mother would mention Rebecca's name during my milestones. This reminds me of when Rebecca became so predictable that I sometimes mouthed the words along with her when she wasn't looking. When college application season arrived, I maintained a pragmatic outlook. My parents had established a substantial college fund for both daughters. This much I knew. What I didn't know was that Rebecca's extravagant 5 years at Princeton, she'd switched majors twice, had depleted not only her portion, but had significantly dipped into mine. "We can contribute about $15,000 toward your first year," my father informed me over dinner one evening. "After that, you'll need scholarships or loans." The statement landed like a physical blow. Just months earlier, they had thrown Rebecca a lavish graduation party at the country club, presenting her with a new BMW as a graduation gift. Now they were telling me that the money promised for my education, my future, had vanished. "But what about my college fund?" I asked, my voice embarrassingly small. My mother gave me a look of practiced patience. "Alexandra, your sister's Princeton education was very expensive. We had to make certain adjustments." Adjustments meant depleting my future to fund Rebecca's present. It wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last. Despite this setback, I secured a partial scholarship to NYU's business school and took out loans for the remainder. My parents seemed almost surprised by my determination. "Business?" my father questioned. "Wouldn't teaching be more suitable for you?" Teaching was a respectable profession, of course, but his implication was clear. He didn't see me succeeding in the cutthroat world of business. That was Rebecca territory. Rebecca, meanwhile, had accepted a position at a prestigious consulting firm in Manhattan. Our parents helped her secure a luxury condo in Tribeca, covering her down payment and subsidizing her rent until she was established. I found a tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn that I shared with 2 roommates, working evening shifts at a local cafe to cover expenses beyond my loans. The contrast in our lifestyles was stark. Rebecca hosted dinner parties in her sleek high-rise apartment, wearing designer clothes and taking lavish vacations. I ate ramen noodles at my desk while creating business plans late into the night, wearing thrift store finds, and picking up extra barista shifts to cover textbook costs. During family gatherings, the disparities became painfully obvious. Holiday dinners featured extensive discussions of Rebecca's clients, her recent promotion, the luxury retreat her firm had taken to Bali. When attention reluctantly shifted to me, the questions were perfunctory. "How are your classes going?" Before I could answer comprehensively, the conversation inevitably swung back to Rebecca's world. "Alexandra should really connect with your HR department," my mother would suggest to Rebecca. "Surely they need smart people for something." The implication was clear. My highest aspiration should be riding my sister's coattails. The possibility that I might harbor ambitions beyond being Rebecca adjacent seemed inconceivable to them. In my junior year, I developed a business concept for a digital platform connecting small-scale sustainable farmers directly with urban consumers, essentially eliminating the middlemen that drove up food prices while driving down farmers' profits. My entrepreneurship professor called the concept brilliant and encouraged me to develop it beyond our class project. Energized by this rare validation, I made the mistake of sharing my excitement during a family dinner. I had barely outlined the basic concept when my father interrupted. "That sounds nice, Alexandra, but it's hardly realistic. The agricultural industry is dominated by major corporations. What could you possibly offer that they don't already provide?" Rebecca nodded in agreement. "Plus, Daddy's right. You don't have any connections in that industry. I think you need to be more practical." My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. "There's nothing wrong with having a regular job, sweetie. Not everyone is cut out for leadership roles." Their dismissal was so automatic, so expected, that I didn't even feel the usual sting. Instead, a quiet determination took root. I stopped sharing my ideas or achievements with my family. What was the point? Their narrative about me was already firmly established. I was the lesser daughter, the one who should adjust her expectations downward. After graduation, I accepted a marketing position at a mid-sized food distribution company, a strategic choice that my family misinterpreted as settling. In reality, I was positioning myself to learn everything about the industry I intended to disrupt. By day, I absorbed knowledge about supply chains, profit margins, and distribution logistics. By night, I refined my business plan, built financial models, and developed a prototype of my platform. When Rebecca announced her engagement to a hedge fund manager named Wesley, our parents immediately offered to cover the entire cost of their wedding at the Hamptons estate of a family friend. The estimated budget, which my mother discussed openly during our weekly family dinners, was approaching 6 figures. "Alexandra," my mother said during one such dinner, "I'm assuming you'll want to help your sister with the wedding planning. You've always been so creative." The way she said creative made it sound like a consolation prize for not being successful. Rebecca smiled magnanimously. "Yes, Alex. You could help with the decorations or something. You've always been good with crafts." The pause before crafts spoke volumes. "Actually," I said, maintaining a neutral tone, "I'm quite busy with work and my side project." My father snorted softly. "Still tinkering with that farmer website thing? Alexandra, at some point, you need to focus on building a real career. Not everyone can be an entrepreneur. There's no shame in being a solid employee." "Robert," my mother admonished gently, "Alexandra is just expressing herself. It's good to have hobbies." A hobby. That's what they thought my business was. A hobby, a distraction, a fantasy to compensate for not being Rebecca. In that moment, watching them exchange knowing glances across the table, something hardened within me. I would no longer seek their approval or validation. I would show them instead. That night in my small apartment, surrounded by business plans and market analyses, I made a promise to myself. I would succeed not despite my family's lack of faith in me, but because of it. Their dismissal had given me something that Rebecca, for all her advantages, had never developed: resilience, self-reliance, and a hunger to prove my worth. What I didn't yet realize was how dramatically that promise would transform not just my future, but the entire family dynamic. The invisible daughter was about to become impossible to ignore, and the reckoning would be far more public than any of us could have anticipated. 6 months after Rebecca's wedding, an extravagant affair that made the society pages of the New York Times, I faced a crucial decision. My prototype platform, now called Harvest Direct, was gaining traction with both farmers and consumers in our beta phase. We had successfully facilitated transactions between 28 small farms and over 300 urban households, with both sides reporting significantly improved economics compared to traditional channels. The data was compelling. Farmers were earning an average of 41% more per unit sold, while consumers were paying an average of 23% less than retail prices for fresher, more sustainable produce. The platform was working exactly as I had envisioned, but to scale beyond our limited test region, I needed capital, significant capital. I had exhausted my meager savings and maxed out 2 credit cards to fund the development and beta phase. The next step required outside investment, which meant quitting my day job to focus entirely on Harvest Direct. The security of a steady paycheck versus the uncertain potential of my business. The practical versus the possible. "You're considering what?" my roommate Mia asked when I mentioned the possibility of resigning. A fellow NYU graduate who had become my closest friend, Mia was supportive but pragmatic. "Alex, your platform is brilliant, but leaving a stable job is risky. Have you spoken to your parents? Maybe they could help with initial funding." I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. My parents? The same people who drained my college fund to give Rebecca a 5th year at Princeton. The ones who called? My business concept unrealistic and a hobby? Mia winced. "Fair point. But this is different. You have actual results now, data to prove your concept works. Maybe they'd see the potential if you presented it properly." Something in her words resonated, not because I believed my parents would suddenly recognize my value, but because I realized I had never directly asked them for support. I had assumed their dismissal, accepted their low expectations as immutable. What if, just once, I explicitly requested the same backing they had always freely given my sister? The following Sunday, I arrived at my parents' house with a professional investor pitch deck, complete with market analyses, financial projections, and testimonials from our beta users. I had spent the entire weekend refining the presentation, determined to approach this as a business meeting rather than a family obligation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My parents seemed surprised by my formal demeanor as I set up my laptop on their dining room table after dinner. "What's all this?" my father asked, eyebrows raised. "I'd like 20 minutes of your time to present a business opportunity," I replied, maintaining a professional tone. "Harvest Direct has successfully completed its beta phase, and I'm seeking initial investment to scale operations." "Alexandra," my mother said with a nervous laugh, "this isn't a boardroom. We're family." "Exactly," I said. "Which is why I'm giving you first consideration before approaching outside investors." Something in my confidence made them uneasy. This wasn't the Alexandra they were accustomed to, the one who accepted their dismissals with quiet resignation. This Alexandra was poised, prepared, and professional. For the next 15 minutes, I walked them through the presentation, outlining our successful beta results, the scalable business model, and the significant market opportunity. I concluded by directly addressing the investment proposition. "I'm looking to raise an initial round of $200,000 in exchange for 15% equity. Based on conservative projections, investors could expect returns beginning in year 3, with potential for significant growth in years 4 and 5. I paused, meeting their eyes directly. I wanted to offer this opportunity to you first, as family. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken dynamics. My father cleared his throat. $200,000 is a substantial amount. Alexandra, for a business with no proven track record beyond a small test group. It's actually quite modest for a startup with our metrics, I countered. Our conversion rates and customer acquisition costs are well above industry standards. My mother looked uncomfortable. Darling, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but this sort of thing isn't really our area of expertise. Perhaps you should consider a more conventional path. Rebecca's firm is always looking for bright people. I'm not looking for a job at Rebecca's firm, I said calmly. I'm offering you an investment opportunity in a business that has already demonstrated viability. My father sighed, the sound familiar in its disappointment. Alexandra, we've always encouraged you to be realistic about your capabilities. Not everyone is cut out for entrepreneurship. There's no shame in that. What exactly about my capabilities do you find lacking? I asked, maintaining my composure despite the simmering anger. My business degree? My industry experience? Or is it simply that I'm not Rebecca? The directness of the question caught them off guard. My father's expression hardened. That's unfair. We've always supported both our daughters equally. The absurdity of the statement broke something inside me. Years of inequity, of dismissal, of being the invisible daughter crashed through the professional veneer I had carefully constructed. Equally? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. You depleted my college fund for Rebecca's 5th year at Princeton. You bought her a BMW while I worked double shifts to afford textbooks. You purchased her condo while I shared a studio with 2 roommates. You spent 6 figures on her wedding while calling my business a hobby. Please, explain how any of that constitutes equal support. My mother looked stricken. Alexandra, that's not what? Not accurate? Not fair to point out? Or just not comfortable to acknowledge? I began packing up my laptop, my hands steady despite the emotion coursing through me. I didn't come here expecting you to suddenly believe in me. I came out of professional courtesy to offer family-first option on what will become a very successful venture. My father's face had reddened with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. This attitude is precisely why we've had concerns about your business acumen. You're being emotional rather than practical. No, I said, closing my laptop case with a decisive click. I'm being honest rather than compliant. There's a difference. As I stood to leave, my mother reached for my arm. Alexandra, please. We only want what's best for you. I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time seeing the limitations of her perspective rather than internalizing them as truth about my worth. The difference between you and me, I said quietly, is that I actually know what's best for me. And from now on, that's what I'll be pursuing, with or without your support. The drive back to my apartment was blurred by unshed tears, but they weren't tears of sadness or rejection. They were tears of release. For years, I had carried the weight of my parents' limited vision for me, contorting myself to fit within its constraints while simultaneously straining against them. In that dining room confrontation, I had finally put down that burden. By the time I parked outside my building, a strange calm had replaced the emotional turmoil. I called Mia from the car. How did it go? She asked immediately. Exactly as expected, I replied. They said no. I'm sorry, Alex. Don't be, I said, surprised by the conviction in my voice. This was never really about getting their money. It was about finally accepting that their approval isn't a prerequisite for my success. The next morning, I submitted my resignation letter. 2 weeks later, I moved out of the apartment I shared with Mia and into a tiny studio that would double as Harvest Direct's first official office. The space was bare bones, a futon that converted to a couch during business hours, a desk that also served as my dining table, and the cheapest internet package available. What the space lacked in amenities, it made up for in possibility. Every square inch represented my declaration of independence, from my parents' limited expectations, from my sister's overshadowing presence, from the prescribed path I was expected to follow. With my resignation, I had precisely 8 months of living expenses saved, assuming absolute minimum spending. 8 months to either secure investment or generate enough revenue to sustain both myself and the business. The timeline was tight, the stakes enormous. Over the following weeks, I approached 17 potential investors. 15 rejected the proposal outright, often with the same dismissive tone my father had used. The remaining 2 expressed interest, but offered predatory terms that would have essentially transferred control of Harvest Direct away from me. As my savings dwindled and rejection mounted, doubt began to creep in. Not doubt about Harvest Direct's potential, the data remained compelling, but doubt about my ability to convince others to see that potential. Perhaps my parents were right. Perhaps I lacked some essential quality necessary for success. During this period of mounting uncertainty, Rebecca called, her first contact since I had declined to attend her housewarming party for the New Hamptons vacation home she and Wesley had purchased. "Mom and Dad are worried about you," she said without preamble. "They say you've quit your job for some internet farming project?" Harvest Direct is a digital platform connecting sustainable farmers directly with consumers, I corrected automatically. "And yes, I'm pursuing it full-time now." "Alex," she sighed, her tone dripping with patronizing concern. "I understand wanting to prove yourself. I really do. But this sounds like an expensive lesson you're setting yourself up to learn. Wesley knows people at several excellent firms. We could put in a word." In that moment, hearing my sister effortlessly echo my parents' limited vision for me, something crystallized. My family's perception of me wasn't just a painful personal dynamic, it was the exact same barrier I was encountering with potential investors. They couldn't see the possibility because they had already decided who I was and what I was capable of accomplishing. "Thank you for the offer," I said with newfound clarity. "But I don't need a referral. What I need is for the people who are supposed to believe in me most to stop being the ones who believe in me least." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. "That's not fair," Rebecca finally said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "No, it's not," I agreed. "But it's reality. And I'm done waiting for that reality to change on its own." After hanging up, I stared at my nearly empty bank account and the calendar showing my rapidly shrinking runway. 8 months had become 5. 5 months to either succeed or crawl back to my family, validating every limitation they had placed on me. In that moment of brutal clarity, I made a decision. If traditional investors couldn't see beyond their preconceptions, I would find another path. If my own family couldn't believe in my potential, I would find people who could. The next morning, I launched a completely different approach, one that would either save Harvest Direct or become the final chapter in my failed entrepreneurial experiment. Either way, I would no longer be invisible. I would no longer be the lesser daughter. I would either succeed dramatically or fail spectacularly. But I would do it entirely on my own terms. My new approach was born of desperation and clarity. If traditional investors couldn't see Harvest Direct's potential because they couldn't see past my youth, gender, or lack of pedigree, I would bypass them entirely. Instead of seeking a large investment from a small number of wealthy individuals, I would seek small investments from a large community of people who actually understood the problem we were solving. I created a crowdfunding campaign targeting 2 specific audiences: the farmers who were being squeezed by traditional distribution channels and the conscious consumers who wanted direct access to sustainable food sources. The campaign video wasn't polished, just me in my tiny studio apartment, speaking honestly about the broken food distribution system and how Harvest Direct was already proving a more equitable model could work. "I'm not asking for charity," I said into the camera. "I'm offering you partnership in fixing a system that undervalues farmers while overcharging consumers. Every dollar invested goes directly toward expanding our platform to more communities, creating a more sustainable and equitable food system for everyone." I set a modest goal of $75,000, far less than I needed, but hopefully achievable, and launched the campaign with low expectations. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, we had reached 30% of our goal, with contributions ranging from $25 to $1,000, many accompanied by personal messages from farmers and consumers who saw themselves in the story we were telling. As the campaign gained momentum, I received an email that would change everything. "Ms. Harrington, I found your crowdfunding campaign quite interesting. I represent Emerald Valley Partners, a venture capital firm specializing in agricultural technology. We would like to discuss potential investment in Harvest Direct. Would you be available for a meeting next Tuesday?" The email was signed by Carlos Mendoza, managing partner. A quick search revealed that Emerald Valley Partners was indeed legitimate, a boutique VC firm with several successful agricultural technology investments in their portfolio. Trying to temper my excitement, I responded professionally, confirming my availability and attaching our latest pitch deck. The reply came within minutes. "No need for the formal presentation just yet. Let's have a conversation first. There's a cafe called Groundwork on W35th, 10 a.m. Tuesday. I'll be the one with the green tie." The casual nature of the request was puzzling but refreshing after months of formal rejections. When Tuesday arrived, I arrived at Groundwork 20 minutes early, nervously rehearsing my elevator pitch while scanning the mostly empty cafe. No one matching my mental image of a venture capitalist was present. At precisely 10 a.m., a man entered, late 50s with salt and pepper hair, wearing worn jeans, a plaid button-down shirt, and, as promised, a green tie that seemed almost comically out of place with the rest of his casual attire. He spotted me immediately, as if he knew exactly who he was looking for. "Alexandra Harrington?" he asked, extending his hand. "Carlos Mendoza. Thank you for meeting me." His handshake was firm, his manner direct but not unfriendly. As we settled at a corner table with coffee, he got straight to the point. "Your crowdfunding campaign caught my attention not just because of the business model, which is solid, but because of your story. You've identified a real problem and created a working solution with minimal resources. That shows grit, and grit is something venture capital firms should value more than they do." He paused, studying me with an intensity that was more curious than judgmental. "But before we discuss investment, I'd like to understand how you got here. Not the polished version you put in your campaign, but the real story." Something about his directness disarmed me. For the next 30 minutes, I shared the unvarnished truth, my parents' favoritism toward Rebecca, the depleted college fund, the constant dismissal of my capabilities, and the recent confrontation that had severed what little remaining support I might have expected from my family. Carlos listened without interruption, occasionally nodding but offering neither sympathy nor judgment. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "My father was a farmer in the San Joaquin Valley," he finally said. "Small operation, just 20 acres of stone fruit. Every year, he would watch his beautiful peaches and nectarines sell for pennies, on the dollar to distributors, knowing they would mark them up 400% by the time they reached consumers in Los Angeles or San Francisco." He took a sip of his coffee, eyes distant with memory. "When I got a scholarship to Stanford, he was proud but confused. 'Why study business when you could study agriculture?' he asked. 'Business is for people who move money around, not people who make things grow.' He didn't understand that I wanted to change the system, not just work within it." Carlos leaned forward, his expression intensifying. After Stanford, I took a conventional path: investment banking, private equity. Made a lot of money moving other people's money around, just as my father predicted. Then, 10 years ago, he died, and I found myself standing in his orchard, realizing I had done nothing to solve the problem that had made his work so much harder than it needed to be. For the first time, I felt a genuine connection with the man across the table. He wasn't just a potential investor. He was someone who understood the problem Harvest Direct was solving from personal experience. That's when I founded Emerald Valley Partners, he continued. We invest exclusively in technologies that make food production and distribution more equitable and sustainable. Your platform isn't just another app, Alexandra. It's addressing a systemic issue that affects millions of farmers and consumers. He pulled a folder from his messenger bag and slid it across the table. We would like to offer you $350,000 in seed funding for 12% equity in Harvest Direct. I stared at the folder, speechless. The amount was significantly more than I had asked for in my original pitch to my parents, with more favorable terms. Why? I finally managed. Why me? Why Harvest Direct? Carlos smiled, the expression warming his otherwise serious face. 3 reasons. First, your platform works. Your beta results prove that. Second, you've demonstrated extraordinary resourcefulness. With limited capital, a trait that predicts success better than any MBA or pedigree. And third, his smile faded into something more solemn. I recognize in you the same determination I had when everyone, including my own family, told me my ideas were impractical. He tapped the folder with one finger. Take the weekend to review the terms with a lawyer. This isn't charity, Alexandra. It's business. I expect returns on this investment, which means I expect you to succeed. And based on everything I've seen, I believe you will. The following Monday, after careful review, with a lawyer I could barely afford, I signed the agreement with Emerald Valley Partners. By Wednesday, the funds were in Harvest Direct's newly established business account, and I had moved operations from my studio apartment to a small but proper office space in a co-working facility. The transition from struggling solo founder to funded startup CEO was disorienting but exhilarating. Suddenly, I could hire a small team, a developer to enhance the platform, a marketing specialist to expand our reach, and an operations manager to coordinate with farmers and delivery logistics. The pressure didn't disappear, but it transformed from existential, will I make rent this month, to strategic, how do we scale effectively? Carlos proved to be more than just a financial backer. He became a mentor, offering guidance without micromanaging, challenging my assumptions while respecting my vision. During our weekly check-ins, he pushed me to think bigger, while keeping me grounded in practical realities. Your family's inability to see your potential isn't your failing, it's their limitation, he told me during one particularly difficult week when technical challenges had delayed our expansion timeline. The question isn't whether you're capable, the data already proves you are. The question is whether you're going to let their limited vision determine your trajectory. With Carlos's support and the breathing room provided by proper funding, Harvest Direct expanded rapidly. Within 6 months, we had gone from 28 farms and 300 consumers to 145 farms and nearly 3,000 active users across 3 states. Revenue was growing month over month, and early users were becoming vocal advocates, spreading word of mouth that proved more effective than our modest marketing budget could have achieved. As Harvest Direct gained momentum, I maintained radio silence with my family. My parents had called several times after our confrontation, leaving messages that ranged from concerned to critical. But I didn't respond. Rebecca had sent a text suggesting, "We clear the air over lunch," but I politely declined, citing my busy schedule. The distance wasn't born of pettiness or revenge. I simply needed space to focus on building something without the constant undertow of their doubt. Then came the article that changed everything. Agricultural Disruptors, 10 Startups Transforming America's Food Systems, read the headline in Forbes's digital edition. Harvest Direct was number 3 on the list, with a quarter-page photo of me standing alongside one of our partner farmers at his organic berry farm. The article praised Harvest Direct's innovative approach and impressive growth metrics, noting that we had created a model that increases profits for farmers while reducing costs for consumers, a win-win that traditional distribution channels have failed to achieve. The writer had done her research, mentioning my background in food distribution and how I had bootstrapped the initial platform before securing investment from agricultural technology venture firm Emerald Valley Partners. The piece concluded by predicting that Harvest Direct could become a significant player in regional food distribution within the next 3 years. It wasn't front-page news or a feature story, but seeing my name and company in Forbes, a publication my father had religiously read every month for as long as I could remember, created a peculiar sense of validation. Not because I needed the external recognition, but because it represented objective confirmation of what my family had consistently failed to see: that my vision was viable, my capabilities substantial, and my determination transformative. Within hours of the article's publication, my phone began buzzing with notifications. LinkedIn connection requests from industry leaders I had admired from afar, emails from potential partners and investors, messages from college friends offering congratulations, and then a text from my father. Saw the Forbes piece. Very impressive. Would love to hear more about how things are going. Dinner this Sunday? I stared at the message for a long time, conflicting emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to respond, with screenshots of his previous dismissals. Not everyone is cut out for entrepreneurship, and you need to be more realistic about your capabilities. Another part craved the parental approval I had been denied for so long. But as I sat in the Harvest Direct office, watching my team work diligently on the platform that was transforming hundreds of farmers' livelihoods, I realized something important. I no longer needed my parents' validation. The Forbes article hadn't made me successful. It had merely recognized the success I had already achieved through my own efforts and the support of people who genuinely believed in my vision. Carlos had been right. My family's limited perception of me had never been my failing. It had been their limitation. And I had finally, definitively outgrown it. I stared at my father's text message for 3 days before responding. Each time I drafted a reply, I deleted it, unsatisfied with the tone, too eager, too cold, too bitter, too accommodating. Finally, I settled on simple courtesy. Thank you for the congratulations. I'm fully booked this Sunday with meetings. Perhaps another time. His response came immediately. Of course, you must be very busy. Your mother and I are free any evening next week. Just let us know. The ball was in my court. I could continue the polite distance, schedule a dinner weeks in the future, or decline entirely. As I considered my options, Carlos's advice echoed in my mind. Success changes the power dynamics in every relationship, he had told me during one of our mentoring sessions. Be prepared for people who dismissed you to suddenly find you fascinating. How you handle that shift says more about your character than how you handled their dismissal. After careful consideration, I agreed to dinner the following Thursday. Not from obligation or a desire for vindication, but from curiosity about who I would be in this new dynamic, and who they would be when faced with evidence that contradicted their long-held narrative about me. The week leading up to the dinner was particularly intense. Harvest Direct had been approached by a major organic grocery chain interested in a potential partnership. Their proposal would give our farmers access to their retail spaces for direct-to-consumer sales, essentially creating farmers' markets within markets, powered by our technology. The opportunity was significant but complex, requiring careful negotiation to ensure our farmers maintained their independence and profit margins. By Thursday evening, after 3 straight days of negotiations, I was exhausted but exhilarated. We were close to an agreement that could expand Harvest Direct's reach exponentially while remaining true to our core mission. As I drove to my parents' house in Greenwich, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I was approaching a family dinner from a position of genuine confidence. Not the defensive posture I had previously maintained, but the natural assurance that comes from knowing your own capabilities and worth. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell, her expression a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. "Alexandra," she said, embracing me with uncharacteristic warmth. "You look wonderful." She stepped back, studying me as if seeing me for the first time. Perhaps she was. The Alexandra who had last stood in this foyer 6 months ago had been financially strained, emotionally raw, and desperate for recognition. The woman who stood there now was the CEO of a rapidly growing company, financially secure, and, most importantly, indifferent to their approval. "Thank you," I replied simply, following her into the familiar dining room where my father waited. He rose as I entered, extending his hand as if greeting a business associate rather than his daughter. "Alexandra, congratulations on your success. We're very proud." The words I had longed to hear for years landed with surprising hollowness. "Thank you," I said again, taking the offered seat at the table. The first course arrived, prepared by the same private chef they had engaged for Rebecca's engagement dinner, and the initial awkwardness gave way to safer topics. The weather, local politics, Rebecca's recent promotion at her consulting firm. "She's been made the youngest partner in the firm's history," my mother said, the familiar pride evident in her voice. "They've put her in charge of their entire healthcare division." "That's impressive," I acknowledged sincerely. Rebecca's achievements had never been the issue, only the disproportionate value assigned to them compared to mine. "Of course, she's working constantly," my father added. "Barely has time for the house in the Hamptons. Such a shame when you work so hard for things you can't enjoy." I recognized the opening he was creating, an invitation to share my own professional demands, to join the narrative of successful offspring whose achievements came at personal cost. 5 years ago, I would have seized the opportunity, desperate, to be included in any conversation that placed my experiences alongside Rebecca's as equally significant. Instead, I sipped my wine and asked, "How is Wesley handling her schedule? I imagine it must be challenging for them both." The conversation meandered through family updates until the main course arrived. As my father served the roast, his expression grew more serious. "Your mother and I have been following Harvest Direct's progress since the Forbes article. Very impressive growth trajectory. You've secured additional funding beyond the initial seed round?" His question was phrased casually, but the subtext was clear. He was trying to ascertain exactly how successful I had become. "We're well capitalized," I replied, matching his business tone. "Our Series A round was oversubscribed, and we're already fielding interest for Series B, though that's premature given our current runway." He nodded, absorbing the information with the same analytical expression he had used when reviewing Rebecca's college acceptance letters years ago. "The agricultural technology sector has significant potential," he observed, "though traditional distribution channels have considerable entrenchment advantages." "Which is precisely why disruption is both necessary and possible," I replied. "The inefficiency of those entrenched systems creates the very opportunity we're capitalizing on." My mother, clearly uncomfortable with the business discussion, attempted to redirect. "Alexandra, we've been meaning to tell you. We've redecorated the study, removed all those old trophies and certificates to create a proper adult space. You should see it before you leave." I knew exactly what she meant. The study had been a shrine to Rebecca's achievements for as long as I could remember. Every academic honor, every award, prominently displayed while my own accomplishments were relegated to a small shelf in the hallway. "I'd like that," I said, curious about this physical manifestation of shifting family dynamics. Dinner continued with increasing comfort, the conversation gradually finding a rhythm that acknowledged our new reality without directly addressing the painful history that preceded it. As we finished dessert, my father cleared his throat with the deliberate sound that had always preceded his most serious pronouncements. "Alexandra, your mother and I owe you an apology." I set down my fork, genuinely surprised. In 28 years, I had never heard my father apologize to anyone. Not to clients whose investments had underperformed, not to my mother when his workaholic tendencies disrupted family plans, and certainly not to me. "We underestimated you," he continued. "We failed to recognize your potential and didn't provide the support we should have. Seeing your success with Harvest Direct has made us realize our error in judgment." My mother reached across the table to touch my hand. "We're so sorry, Alexandra. We should have believed in you the way we believed in Rebecca." The apology was sincere. I could see it in their expressions, hear it in their voices. Yet something about it felt incomplete, as if they were apologizing for a miscalculation rather than a fundamental failure of parental support. "Why didn't you?" I asked quietly. "Believe in me, that is. Was it something specific about me or my ideas that seemed less worthy of support?" The question created visible discomfort. My parents exchanged glances, neither eager to venture into such vulnerable territory. "It wasn't that we didn't believe in you," my father finally said. "It was more that Rebecca's path was so conventional. Her goals aligned with metrics we understood: prestigious degrees, established firms, recognized achievements. Your vision was more unconventional," my mother supplied. "We didn't have the framework to evaluate its potential. That was our failure, not yours." Their explanation was reasonable, even self-aware. Yet it failed to address the deeper inequity, how they had actively drained resources intended for me to support Rebecca, while dismissing my needs and aspirations as secondary. "I appreciate your apology," I said carefully. "But I hope you understand that acknowledging the disparity in how you treated us is only the first step. There were tangible consequences to your choices, financial and emotional, that shaped my journey in ways that can't be undone with an apology." My father nodded, his expression solemn. "We understand, and we'd like the opportunity to make amends if you're open to it." "What does making amends look like to you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "We'd like to invest in Harvest Direct," he replied without hesitation. "A significant amount, comparable to what we've provided for Rebecca over the years. We believe in your vision now, and we want to support it properly." The offer hung in the air between us, tempting, validating, and yet somehow troubling. 6 months ago, this proposal would have seemed like the ultimate vindication. Now, it felt like a transaction that simplified a complex emotional history into a financial equation. "Harvest Direct isn't currently seeking additional investment," I said, my tone gentle but firm. "Our last round was oversubscribed, and we're well-positioned for our current growth trajectory." My father looked genuinely surprised. "But surely additional capital would accelerate your expansion plans. We could contribute up to $500,000, potentially more if needed." I recognized the familiar pattern, my father attempting to solve emotional challenges with financial solutions, the same approach he had always used with Rebecca. Money as proxy for approval, support, and love. "Dad." "Mom," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I didn't come here tonight seeking investment. Harvest Direct's success isn't contingent on your financial support, just as my worth as your daughter shouldn't have been contingent on fitting a prescribed mold of achievement." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We know that now, Alexandra. We're just trying to find a way forward, to repair what we damaged." "The relationship I want with you can't be purchased," I continued. "It needs to be built on mutual respect and understanding. That takes time and consistent effort from all of us." My father, always more comfortable with concrete actions than emotional processing, looked somewhat lost. What would that look like, practically speaking? It was a fair question. What did I want from them, if not their belated financial support or their now abundant recognition of my success? It looks like getting to know each other as adults, I replied after a moment's reflection. Not as the parents who had specific expectations and the daughter who failed to meet them, but as three individuals with our own strengths, limitations, and perspectives. It means acknowledging our history honestly without being defined by it. And most importantly, it means building new patterns of interaction that are balanced and respectful. The study, when they showed it to me later that evening, had indeed been transformed. The wall of Rebecca's accolades had been replaced with tasteful artwork and family photographs, including several of me that I hadn't realized they had kept. My college graduation, a field hockey championship, even a candid shot of me laughing with friends at a beach bonfire years ago. As I prepared to leave, my father handed me a small package wrapped in simple blue paper. "This isn't an investment offer," he said with the hint of a smile. "Just something we should have given you a long time ago." In my car, I unwrapped the package to find a silver frame containing my first business plan, the one I had created for an entrepreneurship. Class in high school. The teacher's comments were visible in red ink at the top. "Exceptional vision and practical application. You have a remarkable mind for business, Alexandra." Attached was a handwritten note from my father. He was right. We should have seen it too. "We're so proud of the woman you've become, not despite our lack of support, but because your determination was greater than our doubt. You've always been extraordinary. We just failed to notice." As I drove back to the city, I reflected on the evening with mixed emotions. Their apology and recognition were genuine, if belated. Their desire to repair our relationship was sincere, if awkwardly expressed. But the most profound realization was about myself. I no longer needed their approval to know my worth. My success hadn't made me valuable. It had simply made my value visible to those who had previously been unwilling or unable to see it. The true transformation wasn't in their perception of me, but in my perception of myself. The Alexandra who had once measured her worth against her sister's achievements and her parents' approval had evolved into a woman who recognized her intrinsic value independent of external validation. That, more than any business success, was the real breakthrough. As I approached the bridge back to Manhattan, my phone buzzed with a notification. The organic grocery chain had accepted our partnership terms, complete with the farmer-favorable conditions I had insisted upon. Harvest Direct was about to enter a new phase of growth that would impact thousands of small farmers across the country. I smiled, thinking of the farmers who would benefit, the consumers who would gain access to better food at fair prices, and the broken system we were gradually transforming. This was success measured not by Forbes articles or family recognition, but by tangible positive impact on real people's lives. My parents' newfound pride was welcome, but it wasn't what drove me forward. What propelled Harvest Direct, and me, was the vision of creating something meaningful, something that aligned with my deepest values while addressing a significant need in the world. That alignment, I realized, was the true measure of success, and the most powerful form of validation. The organic grocery chain partnership propelled Harvest Direct into a new stratosphere of growth. Within 3 months, we expanded from 3 states to 11, onboarding over 500 new farmers and reaching tens of thousands of consumers. Our team grew from 7 to 23 employees, necessitating a move to larger offices in Tawi, a converted warehouse space in Brooklyn's Industry City. The rapid scaling brought expected challenges: technology infrastructure strains, customer service bottlenecks, logistics complications. But these were the kinds of problems I had prepared for, the ones that Carlos had mentored me through anticipating. What I hadn't prepared for was the personal cost of such accelerated success. My workdays stretched to 14 hours, often extending into weekends. Meals became functional rather than enjoyable, sleep a luxury rather than a necessity. The passion that had driven me to create Harvest Direct sustained me through the exhaustion, but I recognized the warning signs of potential burnout looming on the horizon. "You need to build a leadership team you can delegate to," Carlos advised during our monthly check-in. "No founder can single-handedly manage a company growing at this rate. Your job isn't to do everything anymore. It's to find and develop people who can do most things as well as or better than you." His advice was sound, but implementation proved challenging. I had spent so long being the only person who believed in Harvest Direct that releasing control felt like abandoning a child. Every decision, from marketing strategy to farmer onboarding protocols, bore my personal stamp. The thought of diluting that vision through delegation created a knot of anxiety I couldn't easily untangle. As I grappled with these growing pains, an unexpected email arrived from Rebecca. We had maintained minimal contact since the Forbes article, exchanging brief texts on birthdays and holidays, but nothing substantive. "Alex, I'll be in the city next week for a healthcare innovation conference. Would you be open to having lunch? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Rebecca." My first instinct was to decline, citing my overwhelming schedule. The tentative reconciliation with my parents was still fresh and somewhat fragile. Adding Rebecca to the equation seemed unnecessarily complicated during such an intense professional period. Yet curiosity prevailed. What could Rebecca possibly want to discuss? Had our parents shared details of our dinner conversation? Was this an olive branch or something else entirely? We arranged to meet at a small farm-to-table restaurant near my office, neutral territory with the added symbolism of showcasing the kind of sustainable food system Harvest Direct was helping to build. I arrived early, reviewing quarterly projections, on my tablet while waiting. Rebecca entered precisely on time, dressed in the impeccable corporate attire that had always been her trademark. Designer suit, subtle jewelry, perfect hair, the embodiment of conventional success. As she approached the table, I noticed something different in her demeanor. The confident stride remained, but there was a new hesitancy in her expression, a vulnerability I had rarely seen. "Alexandra," she said, extending her hand formally, before thinking better of it and leaning in for a brief hug instead. "Thank you for making time. I know how busy you must be." "It's good to see you, Rebecca," I replied, surprised to find that I meant it. Despite our complicated history, she was still my sister, still the girl who had taught me to ride a bike and braid my hair before parental favoritism and adult complexities had created distance between us. After ordering, we navigated through safe conversational territory, her work, my company's growth, mutual acquaintances. Finally, as our meals arrived, Rebecca set her fork down and met my eyes directly. "I read the case study Harvard Business Review published about Harvest Direct last month," she said. "It was illuminating, not just about your business model, but about you. The writer described you as uniquely combining analytical precision with visionary thinking and genuine empathy for both producers and consumers. When I read that, I realized I've never really understood who you are professionally. I've been so caught up in our family's narrative that I missed seeing your actual capabilities." Her candor caught me off guard. Of all the scenarios I had imagined for this lunch, Rebecca acknowledging her limited perception of me hadn't been among them. "Thank you for saying that," I replied carefully. "I think we've all been operating within a particular family dynamic for so long that seeing beyond it requires deliberate effort." She nodded, pushing her salad around with her fork. "That's actually related to why I wanted to meet. I have a proposition for you, a professional one." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite my wariness. "My firm has been contracted by Wellspring Health to develop a more efficient supply chain for their network of rural hospitals. They're struggling with consistent access to fresh, nutritious food for patient meals, especially in underserved communities. When I read about Harvest Direct's model, I immediately saw the potential application. She paused, gauging my reaction before continuing. I'm proposing a collaborative pilot project. Harvest Direct would adapt your platform to connect small farms with rural hospitals, creating a dedicated supply chain that improves patient nutrition while supporting local agricultural economies. My team would handle the healthcare integration aspects, regulatory compliance, and institutional adoption. The proposal was unexpectedly compelling. We had been considering healthcare applications for our platform, but the regulatory complexities had pushed it further down our priority list. A partnership with Rebecca's firm could accelerate that initiative significantly. Why Harvest Direct? I asked, the question emerging from years of conditioned skepticism about my sister's motives. There are larger farm-to-institution platforms you could partner with. Rebecca met my gaze steadily. Because none of them have achieved your user satisfaction metrics or your growth trajectory. And frankly, none of them have your vision for transforming food systems rather than simply optimizing existing ones. She hesitated before adding, and yes, there's a personal element as well. I'd like the opportunity to work with you as a professional equal, to see firsthand what Mom and Dad and I missed for so many years. The admission hung between us, honest, vulnerable, and unexpected. This wasn't the Rebecca who had accepted our parents' preferential treatment as her due, or who had suggested I take a position at her firm as if it were a charitable act. This was the accomplished professional, acknowledging my expertise and seeking genuine collaboration. The idea has merit, I acknowledged, but any partnership would need to maintain our core commitments to farmer equity and transparency. Those aren't negotiable aspects of our model. I wouldn't expect them to be, she replied. In fact, those principles are precisely what make Harvest Direct valuable to this project. Wellspring Health has made improving community health outcomes a strategic priority. Supporting local agricultural economies aligns perfectly with that mission. As she outlined the potential scope and structure of the collaboration, I found myself genuinely impressed by her thoughtfulness and preparation. She had done extensive research on Harvest Direct's model, identified legitimate synergies, and developed a framework that respected our core values while leveraging both organizations' strengths. I'll need to review this with my leadership team, I said as lunch concluded. We have several major initiatives underway, and resource allocation is always a consideration. Of course, Rebecca nodded. Take whatever time you need. This would be a significant commitment for both of us. As we stood to leave, she hesitated before adding, regardless of your decision on the project, I'm glad we had this conversation, Alexandra. I've missed my sister. The simple statement, free from comparison, competition, or the shadow of parental favoritism, caught me by surprise. For a brief moment, I glimpsed what our relationship might have been without the toxic family dynamics that had shaped it. I've missed you too, I admitted, surprising myself with the truth of it. Back at the office, I shared Rebecca's proposal with my leadership team, the group of talented individuals I had finally begun trusting with significant aspects of Harvest Direct's operations. Their response was cautiously positive, identifying both opportunities and potential complications with the healthcare partnership. The mission alignment is strong, noted our Director of Farmer Relations, Aisha. Rural hospitals serving predominantly agricultural communities creates a beautiful symmetry. Farmers providing healing food to their own communities, including other farmers. The regulatory hurdles are substantial, countered Mateo, our operations lead. Healthcare supply chains have compliance requirements far beyond our current framework. We'd need to develop entirely new protocols and possibly certifications. But the impact could be tremendous, added Layla, who headed our technology team. If we establish a successful model with Wellspring, it could become a template for rural healthcare nationwide. That's thousands of hospitals, and millions of Giao patients potentially benefiting from better nutrition while supporting local farms. Their balanced analysis reflected exactly the kind of leadership team Carlos had encouraged me to build. People who shared Harvest Direct's core values while bringing diverse perspectives and complementary expertise. I had finally learned to delegate not just tasks, but strategic thinking, creating space for both the company and myself to grow sustainably. After thorough consideration, we decided to move forward with a limited pilot program in partnership with Rebecca's team. The scope would be carefully controlled. 3 hospitals in upstate New York connected with 25 farms, allowing us to test the concept without diverting excessive resources from our core growth initiatives. When I called Rebecca to deliver our decision, her genuine excitement confirmed that this was more than just another business development opportunity for her. "This is going to be groundbreaking, Alexandra. I can feel it." "It has potential," I agreed, maintaining my characteristic analytical caution. "But we should be prepared for significant challenges in implementation." She laughed, the sound surprisingly warm. "Some things never change. You were always the one planning for contingencies while I rushed ahead." "Complementary approaches," I suggested, offering an olive branch. "Your ambition, my caution. Together they might create something neither of us could build alone." The weeks that followed brought intense collaboration between our teams. Rebecca's corporate efficiency complemented Harvest Direct's innovative agility, creating a working dynamic that surprised us both with its effectiveness. For the first time in our adult lives, we were relating as professional peers rather than as competitors in a zero-sum game of parental approval. One evening, as we worked late finalizing the implementation timeline for the pilot, Rebecca looked up from her laptop with an expression of bemused realization. "You know what's strange? I always thought we were fundamentally different. That I was the ambitious one and you were I don't even know what I thought. Less driven, more conventional? But working with you these past weeks has shown me how wrong that perception was." I set aside the procurement guidelines I had been reviewing. "What do you see now?" "That you're possibly the most determined person I've ever met," she replied without hesitation. "Just not in the ways that were visible or valued in our family. You didn't care about the external markers of success that Dad prioritized, the prestigious firms, the corner office, the country club membership. You were building something authentic and transformative while I was climbing a predetermined ladder." Her insight was surprisingly perceptive, acknowledging not just my capabilities, but the intentional choices that had guided my path. "I think we were both responding to the same dysfunctional family system in different ways," I offered. "You excelled within the framework provided. I rejected it and created my own. Both approaches required courage and determination." Rebecca considered this, twirling her pen thoughtfully. "Maybe. But there's a freedom in your path that I'm only now beginning to recognize. Do you know how many meetings I sit through discussing how to optimize healthcare delivery systems without ever mentioning the actual health outcomes for patients? The metrics are all about efficiency and cost reduction. The human element gets lost." "And that bothers you," I observed, not a question but a recognition. "Increasingly," she admitted. "This project with Harvest Direct is the first initiative I've led that feels aligned with what healthcare should actually be about: healing people, not just processing them through systems more efficiently." Her vulnerability created an opening for genuine connection, a glimpse of the authentic person beneath the polished professional exterior our parents had so consistently rewarded. "It's never too late to realign your work with your values," I said. "That's what Harvest Direct represents. For me, not just success as conventionally defined, but success on my own terms, measured by impact rather than accolades." Rebecca smiled, a mix of admiration and wistfulness in her expression. Maybe my little sister has some wisdom to share after all. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the unexpected evolution of my relationship with Rebecca. The sister, who had been positioned as my superior, my competition, and my unattainable standard, was now discovering her own limitations while recognizing my strengths. The partnership that had begun as a professional opportunity was creating space for personal healing neither of us had anticipated. This wasn't the vindication I might once have imagined. Rebecca suddenly realizing I was better than her after all. It was something far more meaningful. Two women recognizing each other's authentic value beyond the distorted mirror of parental favoritism and societal expectations. The success that had initially caught my family's attention. The Forbes recognition, the rapid growth, the financial validation had created the opening. But the true transformation was happening in these quiet moments of genuine connection and mutual respect, building a foundation for relationship that had nothing to do with comparison and everything to do with recognition. The Wellspring Health pilot program exceeded our most optimistic projections. Within 4 months, the 3 rural hospitals reported a 37% increase in patient satisfaction with meals, a 22% reduction in food waste, and most significantly, a 14% decrease in average recovery time for non-critical patients, a correlation their nutritionists attributed to the improved quality and nutritional value of hospital food. The farming communities surrounding these hospitals experienced their own renaissance. The guaranteed purchase agreements provided stability that allowed many farms to expand operations, hire additional staff, and invest in sustainable practices that had previously seemed financially out of reach. The success caught the attention of healthcare industry publications, culminating in a feature in Modern Healthcare titled Farm to Hospital Bed: How Harvest Direct and Wellspring Are Revolutionizing Patient Nutrition. The article included interviews with farmers, hospital administrators, and patients, painting a comprehensive picture of a system transformation that benefited every stakeholder involved. What had begun as a cautious collaboration between estranged sisters was now positioned to become a national model for rural healthcare nutrition. Wellspring's board approved an expansion to 20 additional hospitals across 5 states, representing a potential $2 million in annual revenue for participating farms. The morning after the expansion announcement, I arrived at the office to find a delivery waiting on my desk. A simple glass vase containing a single sunflower and a card in Rebecca's distinctive handwriting. To growing in new directions together. Your vision made this possible. R. The gesture was meaningful not because it acknowledged my contribution, that recognition had become pleasantly commonplace in our professional interactions, but because it came without comparison or competition. It wasn't, your vision was better than mine, or, you proved us wrong. It was simply an authentic appreciation for what we were building together. As Harvest Direct's core business and the healthcare initiative both expanded, I faced increasingly complex leadership challenges. The company had grown to over 60 employees, with operations in 17 states connecting more than 1,200 farms to consumers, restaurants, schools, and now healthcare facilities. The startup ethos that had defined our early days was evolving into a more structured organization, requiring systematic processes and specialized expertise. Carlos, who had remained a trusted advisor and board member, recommended bringing in a chief operating officer to manage daily operations, while I focused on strategic vision and external relationships. The founder who scales a company from 0 to 60 million isn't necessarily the same person who scales it from 60 million to 600 million. He observed during a strategy session. The question isn't whether you can do everything, we know you can, but whether doing everything serves the company's mission best. His insight resonated with my evolving understanding of leadership. My value to Harvest Direct wasn't in personally managing every aspect of operations, but in maintaining the integrity of our vision while building a team capable of executing it at scale. After an extensive search, we hired Julian Martinez as COO, a former operations executive from a major food distribution company who had become disillusioned with the environmental and social impacts of conventional supply chains. his expertise, complemented my vision perfectly, allowing me to focus on strategic initiatives including the expanding healthcare partnership with Rebecca. This organizational evolution coincided with a significant shift in my personal life. After years of living in the same modest Brooklyn apartment I had occupied during Harvest Direct's struggling startup phase, I purchased a spacious loft in a converted industrial building in Red Hook. The property featured expansive views of the harbor and, most importantly to me, a rooftop space where I established an urban garden, my own small connection to the agricultural systems I was helping to transform. For the first time since college, I created space for interests beyond work, taking sailing lessons on weekends, joining a contemporary literature book club, and even dating occasionally, though none of the relationships progressed to anything serious. The obsessive drive that had fueled Harvest Direct's early days gave way to a more sustainable balance that nourished rather than depleted me. My relationship with my parents continued its cautious evolution toward something resembling mutual respect. We established a monthly dinner tradition, alternating between their home in Greenwich and restaurants in the city. These encounters remained somewhat formal, more diplomatic summit than intimate family gathering, but the sharp tensions of the past had largely dissipated. My father had taken a genuine interest in Harvest Direct's business model, offering occasionally useful insights from his years in corporate finance. My mother, less comfortable with business discussions, focused on reconnecting through shared memories and current events, carefully avoiding the comparative language that had once been her default. Rebecca and I developed a relationship that blended professional collaboration with tentative personal reconnection. Our weekly strategy meetings often extended into dinners where conversation gradually moved beyond work to more personal territories. Her growing dissatisfaction with certain aspects of corporate consulting, my reflections on balancing leadership with personal fulfillment, and occasionally, cautious explorations of our shared childhood from our now adult perspectives. During one such dinner, following a particularly productive meeting with Wellspring's executive team, Rebecca surprised me with an unusual vulnerability. "I've been offered a partnership position at McKinsey," she said, twirling her wine glass pensively. "Global healthcare division, twice the compensation, significantly more prestige." "Congratulations," I replied, genuinely impressed. "That's a remarkable opportunity." She nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "On paper, it's exactly what I've been working toward my entire career. The pinnacle of success as defined by every metric our father ever valued." "But?" I prompted, recognizing the hesitation in her voice. "But I'm not sure I want it anymore," she admitted. "Working on the Wellspring program with Harvest Direct has shown me what it feels like to create actual positive change, not just optimize systems for corporate clients. The McKinsey position would mean abandoning the healthcare initiative we've built together." Her dilemma struck me as profoundly familiar. The tension between external markers of success and authentic fulfillment, between meeting others' expectations and honoring one's own values. It was the same conflict I had resolved years earlier when launching Harvest Direct against my family's dismissal and doubt. "What would you do if our parents' approval wasn't a factor?" I asked. "If the only criteria were your own satisfaction and sense of purpose?" Rebecca laughed softly. "That's a radical thought experiment for someone who's been chasing parental approval for 34 years. "Trust me, I understand the difficulty," I said with a rueful smile. "But it's ultimately the only question that matters." She was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I think I'd stay with the Wellspring initiative, expand it. There's so much potential to transform rural healthcare, to create a model that could be replicated nationally. The work feels meaningful in a way that optimizing corporate healthcare portfolios never has." "Then you have your answer," I said, simply. "It's not that simple," she countered. "Mom and Dad would be devastated. McKinsey is exactly the kind of prestigious achievement they've always celebrated. Turning it down for a social impact project would seem incomprehensible to them. I regarded my sister thoughtfully, seeing with sudden clarity how differently our shared family dynamics had shaped us. While I had eventually rejected our parents' limited vision and forged my own path, Rebecca had internalized their values so completely that questioning them felt like questioning her very identity. Perhaps the more important question is whether you're willing to make your life choices based on their expectations indefinitely, I suggested gently. At some point, the approval you're seeking has to come from within. She studied me with new awareness. You figured that out much earlier than I did. Not by choice, I reminded her. When they rejected my business plan and refused to invest, in Harvest Direct, I had to decide whether to abandon my vision or pursue it without their blessing. It was painful, but ultimately liberating. Rebecca nodded slowly. I've never had to make that choice. My ambitions always aligned perfectly with their expectations, or perhaps were shaped by them so completely that I never questioned the alignment. Until now, I observed. Until now, she agreed. Until working with Harvest Direct showed me a different kind of success, one measured by impact rather than prestige or compensation. 2 weeks later, Rebecca declined the McKinsey offer and instead proposed establishing a dedicated healthcare division within her current firm, focused specifically on expanding the Harvest Direct partnership model to hospital systems nationwide. The proposal represented a significant professional risk, trading guaranteed advancement for an uncertain innovation, but her conviction was unwavering. Our parents' reaction to her decision revealed how much had changed in our family dynamic. Rather than expressing disappointment or attempting to change her mind, they listened attentively to her reasoning. My father asked thoughtful questions about the business model and growth potential. My mother, in a particularly surprising moment, observed that Rebecca seemed more energized by this work than by anything since college. This evolution, from parents who had once defined success in rigid conventional terms to individuals capable of recognizing alternative forms of achievement, represented its own kind of success. Not the vindication I might once have craved, but something more meaningful. The expansion of a family's capacity to see beyond limitations they had previously enforced unquestioningly. As the Wellspring program expanded to additional hospital systems, Harvest Direct faced its own growth inflection point. Several major venture capital firms approached us with significant investment offers intended to accelerate national expansion. Simultaneously, 2 Fortune 500 food distribution companies expressed interest in potential acquisition, flattering validation of our model's success, but potentially threatening to our mission's integrity. These options created considerable debate among our board and leadership team. The venture funding would allow faster scaling, but dilute existing equity and potentially shift control dynamics. Acquisition offered immediate financial returns, but risked compromising the farmer-centric principles at Harvest Direct's core. During a particularly intense strategy session, as various board members advocated for their preferred directions, Carlos reminded us of a fundamental truth. The question isn't what would make Harvest Direct most profitable or create the fastest growth trajectory, he said, his voice cutting through the debate. The question is, what path best serves the mission Alexandra established when she created this company? Building a more equitable food system that benefits farmers, consumers, and communities. His words refocused the conversation around values rather than valuation, impact rather than exits. After thorough deliberation, we declined both the acquisition offers and the larger venture investments, instead raising a modest growth round from mission-aligned investors who explicitly supported our farmer-centered model. When Forbes published their 30 Under 30 list that year, I was featured in the social entrepreneurship category with a profile that described Harvest Direct as redefining success in the food distribution sector by prioritizing equity and sustainability over mere efficiency and scale. The accompanying photo showed me standing in a sunlit field alongside 3 generations of a family farm in upstate New York, grandmother, parents, and children who had expanded their operation by 40% since. partnering with our platform. The morning the list was published, I received a text from my father. This kind of success matters more than any list. Proud of the change you're creating. Dad. The message, brief but sincere, represented a profound shift in perspective from a man who had once measured achievement exclusively through conventional markers of prestige and financial return. Whether this evolution stemmed from witnessing Harvest Direct's impact, from his own midlife reassessment of values, or simply from the humbling recognition of how thoroughly he had misjudged my potential, was impossible to determine. Perhaps it was a combination of all three. What mattered wasn't the source of his changed perspective, but the fact that change was possible at all, that family systems, like food systems, could be transformed when someone had the courage to envision and implement a different model. As Harvest Direct continued its carefully managed growth, expanding our impact while maintaining our core principles, I often reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The rejection that had initially seemed so devastating had ultimately been liberating, forcing me to build something authentically aligned with my values rather than contorting my vision to fit within others' limited understanding. The success that had finally earned my family's recognition was meaningful, not because it validated me in their eyes, but because it represented genuine positive impact for thousands of farmers and consumers. The respect I had once so desperately sought from my parents and sister now came freely, but its importance had diminished as I developed a clearer measure of value independent of their assessment. In the end, the most significant transformation wasn't Harvest Direct's growth from struggling startup to industry innovator, but my evolution from a daughter desperate for approval to a leader guided by purpose and principle. That transformation, from external validation to internal conviction, was the foundation upon which everything else had been built. 3 years after the Forbes 30 Under 30 recognition, Harvest Direct had grown into a nationally recognized leader in sustainable food distribution. Our network now included over 3,000 farms across 28 states, connecting them directly with consumers, restaurants, schools, and healthcare facilities through our proprietary digital platform. Annual revenue had surpassed $120 million, and our team had expanded to nearly 200 employees working from offices in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and Portland. The healthcare initiative with Rebecca's firm had evolved into its own subsidiary, Harvest Health, serving more than 80 hospital systems nationwide. The program's documented impact on patient recovery rates had caught the attention of insurance providers, who were beginning to offer premium reductions to facilities implementing our farm-to-patient nutritional protocols. My relationship with my family had settled into a comfortable new normal. Monthly dinners with my parents continued, now featuring genuine interest in Harvest Direct's developments and occasional insightful suggestions from my father, whose financial expertise sometimes provided valuable perspective on our expansion strategies. Rebecca and I had established a tradition of quarterly weekend retreats, just the two of us at a small cabin in the Berkshires, where professional collaboration gave way to the personal reconnection that had been missing from our adult relationship for so long. Life had achieved a balance that once seemed impossible. Professional fulfillment, financial security, meaningful family relationships, and even personal interests beyond work. I had recently started taking classes in sustainable architecture, fascinated by the intersection of built environments and food systems, perhaps the foundation for Harvest Direct's next evolution. Then came the crisis that threatened everything we had built. It began with an unusually cool spring in California's Central Valley, followed by a devastating heat wave in June, conditions that decimated stone fruit crops across the region. Similar climate anomalies affected berry production in the Pacific Northwest and leafy greens in the Southwest. Within weeks, nearly 40% of Harvest Direct's partnered farms were reporting crop failures or significantly reduced yields. For conventional distribution systems, such disruptions were manageable through global sourcing, simply shifting purchases to international producers to maintain supply. But Harvest Direct's model was fundamentally local and regional, designed to support domestic small-scale farmers rather than relying on international industrial agriculture. Our commitment to local sourcing, a core value proposition for our consumers and institutional clients, suddenly became our greatest vulnerability. The leadership team gathered for an emergency strategy session at our New York headquarters. Julian, our COO, presented the sobering assessment. We're facing a 42% supply shortfall for the third quarter, with projections showing continued challenges through Q4. Our contractual obligations to institutional clients exceed our projected supply by approximately $3 million in products. Layla, now our Chief Technology Officer, added, "The algorithms can reroute some distribution to less affected regions, but we're still looking at significant shortfalls, particularly for our healthcare partners who depend on consistent supply for patient nutrition protocols." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a temporary business challenge. It was an existential threat to Harvest Direct's model and the thousands of farmers who depended on us for reliable market access. "What are our options?" I asked, maintaining outward calm despite the alarm bells ringing internally. The ensuing discussion explored various possibilities, none ideal. We could suspend some institutional contracts, prioritizing consumer and healthcare channels. We could temporarily source from larger commercial farms outside our normal partner network. We could import certain products from international sources as a stopgap measure. Each option compromised some aspect of Harvest Direct's mission and values. Suspending contracts would damage hard-won institutional relationships. Sourcing from commercial farms would undermine our commitment to small-scale, sustainable agriculture. International imports would increase our carbon footprint and potentially introduce products grown under less rigorous environmental and labor standards. "We need a fourth option," I said finally, interrupting the increasingly circular debate. "One that preserves our commitments to both our farmers and our customers." That evening, I sat alone in my office long after the rest of the team had departed, staring at whiteboards filled with supply projections, contract obligations, and partial solutions. The magnitude of the challenge seemed overwhelming, even for a company that had overcome numerous obstacles to reach its current success. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Heard about the supply crisis. Whatever Harvest Health needs to maintain hospital protocols, we'll find a way. We're in this together." Her support was heartening but didn't solve the fundamental problem. The climate-driven crop failures weren't a temporary blip, but potentially the new normal. A reality that threatened not just Harvest Direct's business model, but the entire concept of regional, sustainable food systems in an era of increasing climate instability. As midnight approached, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, calling Carlos for personal advice rather than formal board consultation. "The climate disruptions aren't going away," he said after listening to my assessment. "This is the first major test of whether sustainable regional food systems can survive in the new climate reality. The question isn't how to weather this particular storm, but how to build resilience for the many storms to come." His perspective shifted, my thinking from tactical crisis management to strategic reinvention. This wasn't just a supply chain disruption. It was a call to evolve our entire approach. I spent the next 3 days in relative isolation, reviewing climate projections, agricultural research, and emerging technologies. On the fourth day, I reconvened the leadership team with a proposal that would either reinvent Harvest Direct or potentially break it. "We're not going to compromise our core values by shifting to conventional supply chains," I began. "Instead, we're going to transform how our partner farms operate to build climate resilience from the ground up." The plan was ambitious and risky. Harvest Direct would establish a climate resilience fund, initially capitalized with $20 million from our reserves and an additional $30 million we would raise from impact investors. The fund would finance infrastructure, improvements for our partner farms, greenhouse construction, water management systems, renewable energy installations, and soil health initiatives, all designed to reduce vulnerability to climate fluctuations. In exchange for this capital investment, farms would commit to multi-year supply agreements with Harvest Direct and implement regenerative agricultural practices that would further enhance their resilience while improving environmental outcomes. This approach addresses our immediate supply crisis by helping farms recover more quickly from current disruptions, I explained. But more importantly, it positions both Harvest Direct and our farm partners for long-term success in an increasingly unstable climate future. The boldness of the proposal generated intense debate among the leadership team. The financial risk was substantial. Redirecting capital from expansion to infrastructure would slow our growth trajectory and potentially concern shareholders focused on traditional metrics. The operational complexity of managing hundreds of infrastructure projects across dozens of states was daunting. Yet the alternative, compromising our core mission or watching our farm partners fail under mounting climate pressure, was unacceptable. After 2 days of rigorous analysis and passionate discussion, the leadership team unanimously endorsed the climate resilience strategy. The board meeting that followed was more contentious. Several investors expressed concern about the financial implications and questioned whether Harvest Direct should be in the business of agricultural infrastructure rather than focusing on our technology platform and distribution networks. Carlos, usually a quiet presence in board meetings, spoke up decisively. Harvest Direct has never been merely a technology company or a distribution network. From day one, Alexandra's vision has been to transform food systems for the benefit of farmers, consumers, and the environment. This proposal represents the next evolutionary step in that vision, addressing the fundamental climate vulnerability that threatens not just this company, but regional food security across the country. His endorsement swayed several wavering board members, but the vote remained uncertain until I made my final argument. The easy path would be to retreat from our commitments when they become difficult to maintain. We could source conventionally, import internationally, or simply reduce our scope to the regions less affected by climate disruptions. Any of those approaches might preserve short-term profitability. I paused, looking each board member in the eye before continuing. But Harvest Direct exists precisely because the conventional food system prioritizes short-term profit over long-term resilience and equity. If we abandon our principles at the first major challenge, we become just another food distribution company, more ethical in our marketing perhaps, but fundamentally no different in our actions. The Climate Resilience Plan passed with a narrow majority, setting in motion the most significant transformation of Harvest Direct since its founding. The implementation proved even more challenging than anticipated. Establishing infrastructure, assessment protocols, developing farm-specific resilience plans, and managing hundreds of simultaneous construction projects stretched our team's capabilities beyond their limits. We hired agricultural engineers, climate specialists, and project managers, essentially building a new division within the company in a matter of months. Financing the initiative required creative approaches beyond the initial capital allocation. We established partnerships with agricultural universities for technical expertise, collaborated with renewable energy providers for favorable rates on farm installations, and worked with state agricultural departments to leverage existing subsidy programs for climate-adaptive infrastructure. 6 months into implementation, with dozens of greenhouse projects completed and hundreds more in progress, I received an unexpected call from my father. "I've been following the Climate Resilience Initiative," he said, uncharacteristically hesitant. "It's an extraordinary response to an existential threat, the kind of bold pivot that few established companies would dare to attempt." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by his assessment. The board was divided on the approach. Many thought we should simply diversify our supply chain internationally until domestic conditions improved. A conventional solution that would have undermined your entire value proposition, he observed. "Alexandra, I owe you an apology. one more specific than what your mother and I offered previously. What do you mean? I asked, puzzled by this sudden shift in conversation. When you first presented your business plan for Harvest Direct, years ago I dismissed it because it didn't fit within my narrow understanding of how businesses create value. I evaluated it against conventional metrics rather than recognizing it as something genuinely innovative. He paused, and I could hear the weight of regret in his voice. What I'm seeing now, this response to the climate crisis, is exactly the kind of leadership that conventional businesses are incapable of providing. You're not just running a successful company, you're demonstrating a new model for how businesses can address systemic challenges while remaining economically viable. His words carried a validation deeper than any previous acknowledgement of Harvest Direct's success. This wasn't about impressive revenue figures or prestigious recognition. It was about recognizing the fundamental value of an approach that prioritized long-term systemic health over short-term financial metrics. Your perspective means a lot to me, I said, surprised by how true this remained despite my years of independence. Especially now, when we're taking such a significant risk. It's not a risk, he replied with unexpected conviction. It's an investment in the only future that makes sense. And for what it's worth, I've directed my investment fund to take a position in several of the renewable energy companies supporting your farm infrastructure projects. I believe in what you're building, Alexandra, not just as your father, but as someone who has spent 40 years evaluating business models. That vote of confidence, professional as much as personal, arrived at a moment when the challenges of implementation had begun to create doubt among some team members and partners. My father's assessment, coming from his conventional business background, provided external validation that helped shore up internal conviction during a period of uncertainty and strain. The Climate Resilience Initiative gradually began showing results. Farms with completed greenhouse installations reported production increases despite ongoing weather volatility. Water management systems proved particularly valuable during both drought conditions and excessive rainfall events. Renewable energy installations reduced operating costs while providing greater independence from increasingly unreliable power grids. 8 months into implementation, supply shortfalls had decreased from 42% to 23%, with projections showing further improvement as additional infrastructure projects came online. Hospital partners maintained uninterrupted access to essential products, while consumer and restaurant channels operated with greater transparency about availability challenges, actually increasing customer loyalty through honest communication about climate impacts and resilience efforts. What had begun as a crisis response was evolving into Harvest Direct's most significant competitive advantage, an integrated approach to climate resilience that conventional food distribution systems couldn't match. Our farmers were becoming not just suppliers, but innovation partners in building agricultural systems capable of thriving in increasingly volatile conditions. The Wall Street Journal published a feature article titled, "Climate Resilience as Business Strategy: How Harvest Direct is Weathering Agricultural Disruption," highlighting our approach as a potential model for other industries facing climate-related threats to their supply chains. The piece included interviews with partner farmers who described how the infrastructure investments had transformed their relationship with Harvest Direct from transactional to truly collaborative. They're not just buying our products, they're investing in our capacity to produce sustainably regardless of what climate challenges arise, explained Maria Chen, a second-generation farmer in Washington's Skagit Valley. That's a fundamentally different approach from any distributor we've ever worked with. The article concluded with an observation that captured the essence of what we were building. In an era when climate change threatens to undermine global food security, Harvest Direct is demonstrating that resilience requires more than adaptation. It demands reinvention of the systems that connect producers to consumers. By investing directly in agricultural infrastructure and regenerative practices, they're creating a model that prioritizes long-term viability over short-term efficiency, a distinction that may determine which food systems survive the climate. Challenges ahead. Reading those words, I felt a profound sense of purpose and clarity. The crisis that had threatened to destroy Harvest Direct had instead catalyzed its evolution into something more impactful than I had originally envisioned. Not just a more equitable distribution platform, but a driver of systemic resilience in an increasingly fragile food landscape. The path forward remained challenging, with countless operational hurdles and financial pressures to navigate. But the fundamental direction was clear. Harvest Direct would continue evolving to address the intersection of food systems, climate change, and community resilience, developing approaches that conventional businesses constrained by quarterly profit expectations could never pursue. This wasn't success as my parents had once defined it, or as traditional business metrics might measure it. It was something more meaningful, the creation of a model that served people and planet while remaining economically viable, proving that business could be a powerful force for systemic change when guided by values beyond mere profit maximization. That realization, that the greatest validation comes not from external recognition, but from alignment between values and impact, was perhaps the most significant harvest of this unexpected crisis. The Climate Resilience Initiative continued to transform both Harvest Direct and our partner farms, creating a new paradigm for agricultural sustainability in the face of increasing environmental volatility. As we approached the 2-year mark of implementation, data confirmed what intuition had suggested. Farms with completed infrastructure improvements were showing not just recovery from climate disruptions, but unprecedented resilience and productivity. Comparative analysis revealed that farms in our resilience program experienced 63% less production disruption during extreme weather events than similar operations without our infrastructure investments. More surprisingly, these farms reported an average 28% increase in yield per acre, while simultaneously reducing water usage by 31% and chemical inputs by 44%. These results attracted attention far beyond our immediate stakeholder network. Environmental organizations, agricultural policy experts, and international development agencies began studying the Harvest Direct model as a potential template for climate adaptation in vulnerable agricultural regions worldwide. Amid this period of validation and expansion, I received an unexpected call from Rebecca one Tuesday morning in early April. "Alexandra, it's Dad. He's had a stroke." The words cut through the ambient noise of the office, creating a sudden vacuum of sound and sensation. "How bad?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Serious," Rebecca replied, her typical composure fractured by fear. "They've taken him to Greenwich Hospital. Mom's already there. Can you come?" "I'm on my way." The drive to Greenwich passed in a blur of anxiety and disjointed memories. My father's stern appraisals of my childhood achievements, his dismissal of my business plan, his eventual recognition of Harvest Direct's value, our cautiously rebuilt relationship of recent years. The man who had once called me worthless now valued my perspective enough to align his own investment strategies with Harvest Direct's vision. The father who had funded my sister's lifestyle while leaving me to struggle had eventually come to see the strength that struggle had forged in me. At the hospital, I found my mother sitting rigidly in the ICU waiting area, her normally perfect appearance disheveled, her eyes fixed vacantly on the wall opposite. Rebecca paced nearby, phone pressed to her ear as she updated relatives in efficient, controlled tones that barely contained her anxiety. "Mom," I said gently, taking the seat beside her. "How is he?" She turned slowly, as if returning from a great distance. "Alexandra, you're here." "Of course I'm here. Tell me what the doctors have said." Over the next hour, I pieced together the situation through my mother's fragmented recounting and Rebecca's more clinical summaries of medical reports. My father had collapsed during his morning tennis match, a Tuesday ritual maintained for decades. The stroke was severe, affecting the left side of his brain. He remained unconscious, his condition critical but stable. The neurologist, when she finally emerged to speak with us, was guardedly pessimistic. "The next 48 hours are critical," she explained. "If he regains consciousness, we'll have a better sense of the extent of damage and potential for recovery. I must prepare you, however, for the possibility of significant impairment to speech and motor function on his right side." The three of us, mother, daughters, established an unspoken rotation over the following days. My mother refused to leave the hospital, sleeping fitfully in the uncomfortable chair beside my father's bed. Rebecca and I alternated between keeping her company, conferring with medical staff, managing practical matters, and maintaining some semblance of our professional responsibilities through brief, distracted remote work sessions in the hospital cafeteria. On the third day, as I sat alone with my unconscious father during my mother's reluctant trip home to shower and change clothes, his hand twitched beneath mine. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then gradually settling on my face with clear recognition. "Dad?" I whispered, pressing the call button for the nurse. "Can you hear me?" He blinked once, deliberately. "Yes." The medical team that responded moved with practiced efficiency, conducting assessments and asking simple questions that confirmed both the severity of his condition and his remarkable good fortune. The stroke had indeed affected speech and right side, motor control, but his cognitive function appeared largely intact, a doctor's cautious best-case scenario given the initial presentation. Over the following weeks, my father's recovery revealed both his vulnerability and his determination. Speech therapy sessions reduced him to frustrated tears as he struggled to form basic sentences. Physical therapy left him exhausted and irritable. Yet, he approached rehabilitation with the same disciplined focus he had once applied to building his investment portfolio, measuring progress in minor victories, a clearly articulated phrase, 3 additional steps with the walker, a signature, that approximated his pre-stroke precision. Harvest Direct operations continued under Julian's capable leadership, with me balancing limited remote work with hospital visits and family support. Rebecca similarly scaled back her professional commitments, her normally overscheduled calendar, suddenly reorganized around her father's therapy appointments and her mother's emotional needs. 1 month into my father's recovery, as I sat with him during a break between therapy sessions, he laboriously formed a sentence that would initiate a profound shift in our family dynamic. "Need talk about company," he said, frustration evident as words evaded his grasp. "Harvest Direct?" I asked, assuming he wanted an update on our ongoing projects. He shook his head, grimacing with the effort of finding precision in his compromised language. "My company, Heritage, Investments." I nodded, understanding. Dawning. Heritage Investments was my father's boutique investment firm, established 30 years earlier, and grown into a respected manager of high-net-worth portfolios with over $4 billion in assets under management. "You want to discuss Heritage's operations while you're recovering?" I clarified. "Future," he said with visible effort. "Who runs after?" The unfinished sentence hung between us, laden with implications neither of us wanted to directly acknowledge. My father, always the pragmatist, was contemplating succession planning in the face of his own mortality and potential ongoing impairment. "Have you spoken with Rebecca about this?" I asked, assuming my sister, with her MBA and corporate consulting experience, would be the natural successor to my father's financial services firm. To my surprise, he shook his head decisively. "Not right. For Heritage." With painstaking effort, he added, "Want you to consider." The suggestion was so unexpected that I initially thought I had misunderstood his impaired speech. My father wanted me, the daughter whose business acumen he had once dismissed, whose approach to value creation he had considered unrealistic, to consider taking over his traditionally structured investment firm. "Dad, I'm not sure I understand. Heritage is a conventional financial services company. It's nothing like Harvest Direct. He nodded, acknowledging this obvious truth. With careful precision, each word clearly requiring significant effort, he explained, need, new, vision, climate, investments, impact, focus, your expertise. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of his physical therapist, but its implications lingered in my thoughts throughout the following days. My father wasn't simply offering me control of his company out of some sense of belated fairness or compensation for past inequities. He was recognizing that the perspective he had once dismissed as idealistic might actually represent the future of investment strategy in a world increasingly defined by climate vulnerability and social inequity. 2 weeks later, he arranged a meeting with his Heritage Investments executive team, Rebecca, and me in the hospital's conference room. Though still struggling with fluent speech, he had prepared a written statement that Rebecca read on his behalf. Heritage Investments has succeeded for 3 decades by recognizing and responding to changing market dynamics. The next decade will be defined by climate adaptation, resource constraints, and demands for greater equity. These aren't just social considerations, but fundamental investment factors that will determine which enterprises thrive and which fail. Alexandra's work with Harvest Direct has positioned her at the forefront of understanding how businesses can address these systemic challenges while remaining profitable. Her perspective is precisely what Heritage needs as we evolve our investment approach for the realities our clients now face. I am therefore proposing that Alexandra join Heritage Investments as Executive Vice President of Strategy, with the intention that she assume the role of CEO within 18 months, subject to board approval and her acceptance of this responsibility. The statement concluded with a handwritten postscript in my father's now shaky script. The daughter I once failed to value may be the one best positioned to preserve the value of what I've built. The Heritage executives, men and women who had worked alongside my father for decades, looked stunned by this unexpected succession plan. Rebecca, to my surprise, showed no sign of resentment or disappointment. Instead, she offered a supportive smile, as if this development made perfect sense to her. When the executives had departed, promising to consider the proposal and reconvene the following week, Rebecca, my father, and I remained in the sterile conference room that had suddenly become the site of a family reckoning. "You're surprised," my father said to me, his simplified speech somehow making the observation more direct. "Completely," I admitted. "Heritage has always represented everything Harvest Direct isn't: conventional metrics, traditional investment approaches, quarterly returns over long-term impact." He nodded slowly. Could be different. Rebecca leaned forward. "Dad and I have been discussing this since before his stroke. Heritage's clients are increasingly concerned about climate risks to their portfolios. They're asking questions about sustainable investing that the current leadership isn't equipped to answer. Your expertise," my father added with careful enunciation, "valuable, beyond food systems." The proposal created a profound dilemma. Harvest Direct was thriving under the climate resilience model, expanding its impact and establishing new paradigms for agricultural sustainability. Taking on Heritage would mean dividing my attention and energy between 2 very different organizations. One I had built from nothing based on my own vision, the other established by my father according to conventional principles I had long questioned. Yet the opportunity to transform a traditional investment firm, to redirect billions in capital toward enterprises addressing climate resilience and social equity, represented a scale of potential impact that even Harvest Direct's growing operations couldn't match. "I need time to think," I said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make impulsively." My father nodded, understanding evident in his eyes. Take time. Important choice. As the 3 of us left the conference room, My father in his wheelchair, Rebecca and I flanking him. A hospital administrator approached with clipboard in hand. "Mr. Harrington, I have the insurance forms you requested," she said, handing the clipboard to my father before realizing his right side impairment would make signing difficult. "Oh, I'm sorry. Perhaps one of your daughters." My father gestured toward me with his left hand. "Alexandra, she handles decisions now." The simple statement, offered to a stranger in a hospital hallway, carried a weight of recognition and trust that no formal business arrangement could convey. This man who had once considered me the lesser daughter now designated me as his decision-maker without hesitation. Over the following weeks, as I contemplated the heritage proposition, I sought counsel from those whose perspectives I valued. Carlos advised considering the opportunity's potential for systemic impact while ensuring Harvest Direct's mission wouldn't be compromised. Julian assured me that our leadership team could maintain operational excellence with my role shifting toward more strategic oversight. Rebecca offered perhaps the most surprising perspective. "You know why Dad wants you for Heritage, don't you?" she asked during one of our evening hospital visits. "It's not just about climate expertise or investment strategy." "What do you mean?" "He sees in you something he lacks, the courage to question fundamental assumptions, to build something new rather than optimizing what already exists. That's what Heritage needs now, and he knows it." Her assessment cut through my lingering doubts about my father's motivations. This wasn't about compensating for past favoritism or making amends for previous dismissal. It was a clear-eyed recognition of specific capabilities I had developed precisely because I had been forced to forge my own path without the support he had lavished on Rebecca. 3 months after my father's stroke, with his recovery progressing steadily, though incompletely, I accepted the position at Heritage Investments with several negotiated conditions. I would remain CEO of Harvest Direct, with Julian assuming more. Operational control. Heritage would establish a climate resilience investment fund with initial capitalization of $500 million, and the firm would develop transparent impact metrics to accompany traditional financial reporting for all investments. The announcement generated significant attention in financial circles, with the Wall Street Journal describing the succession plan as signaling a potential sea change in how traditional investment firms approach environmental and social factors, not as peripheral ESG considerations, but as core drivers of long-term value. At the press conference confirming my appointment, a reporter asked pointedly about my qualifications to lead a conventional investment firm, given my background in alternative business models. Before I could respond, my father, standing beside me with the support of a cane, took the microphone with his still functional left hand. With careful, deliberate speech that revealed both his ongoing impairment and his absolute conviction, he answered, "Alexandra built something valuable. When everyone, including me, said impossible, that's exactly what investment needs now." In that moment, as cameras flashed and reporters scribbled notes, I recognized the profound irony of our journey. The daughter once deemed worthless had not only proven her value through independent success, but was now being entrusted with preserving and transforming the very institution that had once symbolized the conventional values used to dismiss her. The inheritance being offered wasn't merely financial control or professional status. It was the opportunity to reshape a significant pool of capital according to principles I had developed while building Harvest Direct, principles my father had come to recognize as not just idealistic, but necessary for navigating an increasingly volatile world. As we left the press conference, my father squeezed my hand with his still strong left grip and said with careful precision, "Proud of you, always. Should have been." The words were simple, the sentiment belated. Yet they represented not just personal reconciliation, but a more profound recognition. that the metrics by which he had measured worth throughout his career had been incomplete at best, fundamentally flawed at worst. In acknowledging my value, he was simultaneously questioning the very value system that had guided his life's work. That evolution, from rigid adherence to conventional measures of success toward recognition of broader, more systemic forms of value creation, represented a transformation perhaps more significant than any business achievement. It suggested that even the most entrenched perspectives could change when confronted with compelling evidence and authentic results. Heritage Investments and Harvest Direct remained distinct entities with different structures and immediate objectives. Yet, increasingly, they became laboratories for a shared exploration of how capital might be deployed to address systemic challenges while generating sustainable returns. The daughter once deemed worthless was now architecting a new understanding of value itself, one that encompassed financial returns alongside social equity, environmental regeneration, and long-term resilience. The journey from rejection to headlines to transformation had come full circle, creating not just personal vindication, but the potential for systemic change far beyond what either my father or I could have imagined during those early confrontations over my unrealistic business plans. 6 months into my dual leadership role at Harvest Direct and Heritage Investments, patterns began emerging that suggested possibilities beyond what I had initially envisioned. While the organizations remained structurally separate, their complementary capabilities created natural synergies that pointed toward a more integrated approach to systemic change. Harvest Direct brought deep operational expertise in building resilient supply chains, direct relationships with thousands of small-scale producers, and proven technology for connecting distributed production to consolidated demand. Heritage contributed institutional credibility in financial markets, relationships with high-net-worth investors increasingly concerned about climate risk, and the capacity to deploy significant capital toward promising innovations. Together, they represented a potentially powerful vehicle for addressing food system vulnerabilities on a global scale, vulnerabilities that were becoming increasingly evident as climate disruptions intensified worldwide. The catalyst for transforming this theoretical potential into concrete action arrived unexpectedly during the World Economic Forum in Davos, where I had been invited to participate in a panel discussion on agricultural resilience in an era of climate volatility. What was scheduled as a relatively minor session in the sprawling conference agenda unexpectedly became a focal point of attention when unprecedented flooding in Southeast Asia's rice-producing regions coincided with severe drought across Australian wheat fields, simultaneous disruptions to two of the world's most important grain supplies. Global commodity markets responded with alarming volatility. Rice futures surged 42% in 3 days, while wheat prices followed a similar trajectory. Nations with substantial grain reserves implemented export restrictions to protect domestic supplies, further destabilizing markets and threatening food security in import-dependent regions. Against this backdrop of emerging crisis, our panel discussion transformed from academic exchange to urgent deliberation. Representatives from international development agencies, agricultural conglomerates, and food-insecure nations all sought practical approaches to building more resilient food systems in the face of accelerating climate instability. When my turn came to speak, I shared Harvest Direct's experience with the Climate Resilience Initiative, emphasizing the concrete results our partner farms had achieved through targeted infrastructure investments and regenerative practices. The presentation included compelling data visualizations showing how these farms had maintained production despite severe weather events that had devastated neighboring operations following conventional methods. The challenge isn't a lack of solutions, I concluded. It's the absence of mechanisms to deploy these solutions at sufficient scale and speed. We know what works. The question is how to implement these approaches across diverse agricultural systems worldwide before climate disruptions further undermine global food security. The panel moderator, a respected agricultural economist from Oxford University, responded with unexpected directness. Ms. Harrington, Given your unique position leading both an agricultural innovation company and a significant investment firm, what prevents you from creating precisely the implementation mechanism you're describing? If the solutions exist and the need is clear, what's missing is the institutional framework to connect capital with on-the-ground transformation. The question crystallized a vision that had been forming gradually during my months of dual leadership. An international entity specifically designed to accelerate agricultural climate resilience through the strategic deployment of capital, technology, and operational expertise. That evening, in the privacy of my hotel room, I outlined the preliminary framework for what would eventually become Resilient Harvest Global, an independent organization that would leverage Harvest Direct's operational model and Heritage's investment capabilities to implement climate-adaptive agricultural infrastructure in vulnerable regions worldwide. Upon returning from Davos, I assembled a small team drawn from both organizations to develop the concept further. Over the following weeks, this cross-functional group identified 3 core components necessary for the initiative's success. First, a specialized investment vehicle, structured as a blended finance facility, that would combine traditional investment capital from heritage clients with concessionary funding from development agencies and philanthropic sources. This approach would distribute risk appropriately while generating returns proportional to each capital provider's risk tolerance. Second, an implementation framework adapting Harvest Direct's resilience infrastructure model to diverse agricultural contexts worldwide, with protocols for assessing local needs, designing appropriate interventions, and measuring outcomes across environmental, social, and financial dimensions. Third, a technology platform extending Harvest Direct's digital marketplace to connect smallholder producers with both local and international markets, providing the stable demand necessary to justify infrastructure investments while shortening supply chains to reduce both costs and carbon emissions. The comprehensive proposal represented a bold expansion beyond either organization's existing scope, requiring significant capital, institutional partnerships, and operational capacity. When I presented it to the respective boards of Harvest Direct and Heritage Investments, reactions ranged from enthusiasm to skepticism to outright opposition. "The concept is compelling," acknowledged Serena Kwan, Heritage's longest-serving board member, "but it substantially exceeds our traditional mandate. Our fiduciary responsibility is to our current clients, not to global food security, however worthy that cause might be." Carlos, representing Harvest Direct's board perspective, raised different concerns. "We've only recently stabilized after our own climate crisis response. Expanding internationally with an unproven model could dilute our focus and potentially compromise our domestic impact." These objections reflected legitimate institutional constraints rather than lack of vision. Both organizations operated within specific parameters that limited their capacity to independently address challenges of this magnitude. Harvest Direct remained focused on domestic markets where its model was proven. Heritage was bound by its fiduciary obligations to prioritize client returns over broader systemic impacts. Yet the vision of Resilient Harvest Global addressed a critical need that neither organization alone could fully meet, nor could any existing entity I was aware of. The escalating climate threats to global food production demanded new institutional approaches that bridged traditional divides between profit-seeking capital and impact-focused implementation. Rather than abandoning the concept in the face of institutional limitations, I modified the approach. Instead of positioning Resilient Harvest Global as a joint venture between existing organizations, I reframed it as an independent entity that would partner with Harvest Direct and Heritage while establishing its own governance structure and capital base. This revised framework preserved the core vision while respecting the constraints of established institutions. Harvest Direct could provide operational expertise and technology licensing without assuming direct implementation responsibility beyond its established markets. Heritage could create a dedicated climate resilience fund for interested clients without modifying its broader investment mandate. The independent structure also created space for additional partners essential to global implementation, international, development agencies, agricultural research institutions, and regional financial entities with deep local knowledge of target markets. With this refined approach, I secured qualified approval from both boards to explore the concept further, including authorization to commit limited resources toward developing a comprehensive implementation plan and identifying potential founding partners. The first such partner emerged from an unexpected quarter. During a climate finance conference in Singapore, I reconnected with Priya Mehta, a former Harvard Business School classmate who now led agricultural investments for a major Singaporean sovereign wealth fund. Over dinner, I shared the evolving vision for Resilient Harvest Global. This addresses precisely the concerns our investment committee has been raising. Priya responded with immediate interest. We have substantial agricultural holdings across Southeast Asia that face escalating climate risks. Traditional approaches to managing those risks, primarily through geographic diversification and insurance, are proving increasingly inadequate as disruptions intensify and spread. The Singaporean fund's interest catalyzed momentum. Within weeks, Priya had arranged introductions to development finance institutions in Japan, South Korea, and Australia, all seeking solutions to agricultural climate resilience in the Pacific Rim. These conversations revealed substantial appetite for the model among institutions with complementary capabilities. Some brought capital, others regional implementation expertise. Still others, technological innovations specific to local agricultural systems. 4 months after the initial Davos conversation, I convened a founding partners meeting in Singapore with representatives from 12 organizations across 3 continents. The gathering included development finance institutions, sovereign wealth, funds, agricultural technology providers, and regional farming cooperatives. A deliberately diverse coalition reflecting the multifaceted nature of the challenge we sought to address. What unites us, I noted in my opening remarks, is recognition that climate disruption to food systems represents a threat that no single organization or approach can adequately address. The complexity and urgency of this challenge demand new, institutional forms that integrate financial, technological, and operational capabilities across traditional boundaries. Over 3 intensive days, the group hammered out the foundational framework for Resilient Harvest Global, its governance structure, initial capitalization approach, implementation methodology, and 3-year rollout plan focusing initially on rice-producing regions in Southeast Asia and Vietnam, areas facing acute climate vulnerability that threatened food security for hundreds of millions of people. The final structure reflected principles of distributed governance rather than centralized control. Resilient Harvest Global would function as a coordinating entity, harmonizing the contributions of specialized partners rather than attempting to centralize all capabilities within a single organization. Financial partners would provide capital according to their specific risk-return requirements. Implementation partners would adapt resilience methodologies to local contexts. Technology partners would ensure appropriate digital infrastructure for connecting producers to markets. This networked approach acknowledged a fundamental reality of systemic change. No single entity, however well-resourced or visionary, could independently address challenges of this complexity and scale. Effective intervention required coordinated action across institutional boundaries, with each participant contributing according to their specific capabilities while sharing a common framework for measuring impact. When the founding partners' agreement was finalized, establishing initial capitalization of $840 million and operational commitments across 7 countries, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led to this moment. From the rejected business plan presented at my parents' dining room table to this global initiative connecting institutional capital with vulnerable agricultural communities, the path had been neither direct nor predictable. The evening after the signing ceremony, as founding partners celebrated on a rooftop overlooking Singapore's gleaming skyline, I received an unexpected video call from my father. His speech remained somewhat impaired from the stroke, but he had regained significant functionality and clarity. "Saw the announcement," he said, gesturing toward a tablet displaying the press release about Resilient Harvest Global's formation. "Extraordinary achievement." "Thank you," I replied, stepping away from the celebration to find a quieter corner. "It's just beginning, of course. Implementation will be the true test." He shook his head slightly, a gesture I had come to recognize as disagreement. Already successful, bringing together those institutions. Unprecedented. Shows what's possible. His assessment surprised me. My father had always emphasized measurable outcomes over promising beginnings, tangible results over theoretical potential. Yet here he was, recognizing the achievement inherent in establishing a new institutional form, even before it had demonstrated operational impact. "What made you change how you evaluate success?" I asked, genuinely curious about his evolution. He considered the question carefully, his slower speech patterns imposing a thoughtfulness that his pre-stroke communication had often lacked. Realized. Building new models. Harder than optimizing old ones. Creating possibility. Achievement itself. The insight reflected a profound shift in perspective from the father who had once measured worth exclusively through conventional metrics like prestigious affiliations and quarterly returns. His stroke-imposed limitations had perhaps created space for reconsidering what truly constituted value and achievement. "Harvest Direct taught me that," I acknowledged. "The most significant impact often comes from changing the system itself, not just performing well within established parameters." He nodded, the movement slightly asymmetrical due to his lingering impairment. "Wish I'd understood sooner. Might have supported you differently." The simple acknowledgement touched me deeply, not because I still needed his validation, but because it represented genuine learning and growth from a man whose certainties had once seemed immutable. "We arrived at the right understanding eventually," I said, offering reconciliation rather than dwelling on past limitations. "And now we're building something neither of us could have created alone." As I rejoined the celebration, watching representatives from previously disconnected domains, finance, agriculture, technology, policy, engaged in animated conversation about implementation possibilities, I recognized that the true achievement wasn't the institutional structure or the capital commitments, substantial as they were. It was the expansion of imagination about what was possible when traditional boundaries between profit and impact, between financial and social return, were reconceived as false distinctions rather than fundamental divisions. The daughter once deemed worthless for pursuing an unrealistic vision was now architecting new institutional forms specifically designed to address challenges that conventional approaches had proven inadequate to solve. The success that had initially caught attention through headlines had evolved into something far more significant: the capacity to convene diverse capabilities toward shared purpose despite differences in primary motivation and institutional form. This wasn't merely personal vindication, but proof of concept for a different approach to value creation, one that measured success not through narrow financial metrics or individual achievement, but through the capacity to catalyze systemic change by connecting previously siloed resources, perspectives, and capabilities. As Resilient Harvest Global moved from concept to implementation in the months that followed, this fundamental insight informed every aspect of its development. That transformative impact requires not just innovative solutions, but innovative structures for delivering those solutions at appropriate scale and speed. The true measure of success would not be personal recognition or institutional growth, but tangible improvement in agricultural resilience across vulnerable regions, measured in stable food production despite climate disruptions, in producer livelihoods maintained despite environmental challenges, in communities thriving where conventional predictions suggested inevitable decline. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.